Okay, I'm recording now. And what I want to do today is before we actually start on the prologue, um, I wish to talk about the issues that somebody's writing me. Uh, Let me see if I could get Des in there. That's bizarre because it worked for her last class. Did anybody have any trouble logging in today? Did you need the password?
Yeah, I did.
Who's I? Marissa?
So,
And that's on your new computer, right?
yeah,
But nobody else needed the password? Marissa,
no.
what you may want to do is update Zoom on your computer, even though it's new. Okay, we'll see if that works for Zoom.
Okay.
And I will check, but nobody else had any problem. I'm giving her another minute to see if that worked. Yep. So Des, what happened this time? Do you know? Des?
I have no idea. I went through all
And you tried the
do
password?
you not hear me?
Yeah, we could hear you. Could you hear us, Des? Des, could
Wait,
you?
but do you yes, yes. It just said meeting ID not valid. Yes.
Yeah, I don't get it because for some of you it worked. Gabby, get your self together and sit down. Okay. So what I want to do is go through the timeline. Please, in the future, when it's a 6 o'clock deadline, get it in by 6, because what everybody wrote was really good, but I was trying to organize this so we could have more of a discussion and less of me. So tomorrow we're going to go through the prologue, but today I want to go through the time period, which is not only effective for this, but also for other things. Now I just have to pull up one more thing on the screen. So give me one more second. While I do this. Okay. Boom. Just give me 1 second, sir. Okay, I got it. Good. Okay, stop. So I'll get to that in a second. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen now. Now, I don't know if he's here. Who has read the whole book, The Invisible Man? No one? Okay, Ibrahim, I believe, has, but he's not here right now. So I'm going to just go through these. You can see the screen, right? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. That sort of straightforward. His mother was a nursemaid. Who do you think she was a nursemaid to?
A white family.
Yeah. And white people would often use African American women to breastfeed not only their babies, but who else? The elderly. You've heard of the Rockefeller family, right? John D. Rockefeller was a total racist, was breastfed by an African American woman at the end. Okay. It's, not unusual for that time that all 4 of his grandparents were slaves. Um, Now, I want to talk about Tuskegee Institute. Does anybody know anything about it? Like who founded it? Melissa?
I've heard of like the Tuskegee, like as in like the experiment, like the Tuskegee experiment.
Yeah, that's important. And we're going to look at that later on, where they decided to do syphilis tests on African Americans without telling them or treating them. And that was called the Tuskegee experiment. There was also something called the Tuskegee Airmen, which are Black airmen who were trained but weren't allowed to fly during most of the war. Did anybody ever have Fatima Sheikh for English at St. Peter's? She retired about a year ago. Her father was one of those. But the Tuskegee Institute was the first of the historically black colleges. Could anybody tell me about that? Well, I think the name tells you a lot. Historically black colleges. Were they for white people?
No, there's a set of schools, like they now refer to them as HBCUs, so like they're historically black college and universities
Yeah.
that are all like throughout the United States, like Howard University, Hampton University.
Hampton. Tuskegee was the first. Could you think of any current vice presidents who went to one?
Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris went to Hampton. Okay. Now, Booker T. Washington founded the Tuskegee, and he and W.E. Du Bois had a huge, huge debate. And that comes to place because Ellison was good friends with Du Bois about the role of African Americans in civil rights. Booker T. Washington said that blacks and whites should remain separate as the fingers on his hand and start from the bottom and work their way up. Whereas Du Bois felt that people should have their rightful place and have a right to education and not have to work their way up from the bottom. And the reason I'm bringing it up now, Tuskegee was founded by Washington, Booker T. Washington, who was a separatist, but not a separatist, but felt that there should not be great advancement, just start at the bottom. And there was a huge debate between him and Booker T. And in the book itself, he's in constant conflict with a Booker T. Washington character. Okay. He first had his encounter with the law when he was a hobo, a term we shouldn't be using now. Now we're getting to things that you read. Okay, tell me, a few people wrote about Langston Hughes. The Harlem Renaissance. Des, you wrote about Zora Neale Hurston. Tell us about her.
You want a little synopsis of what I wrote, or just?
Unless you want to think on your feet.
Well, yeah, she was a prominent Black woman author out of the Harlem Renaissance period, which was a pivotal cultural revival of, sorry, let me turn my camera on, of African American culture. So her book, Their Eyes Were Watching God, that's her most famous book. And just a quick summary on the book. The main character, her name is Janie, and we see her explore her sexuality and her independence. She's trying to find her voice all throughout the novel. And there are themes of, again, like women's liberation, the unique experiences that Black women face within their own Black community. And that book was hated by many of her fellow Black peers. And Ralph Ellison also, he critiqued the book and he said that it was just too, I think it was just too plain, and that she didn't, Zora Neale Hurston, she didn't really give a clear, she didn't give clear social commentary or a critique on race relations at the time. So this was like the 30s. Instead, she opted to talk about the emotions, the feelings of just a regular Black woman. And so a lot of men didn't like that. But recently, well, more for like, I think it was like in the 70s, scholars found her book. And since then, it's just been critically acclaimed. And it's like the centerpiece of the Harlem Renaissance movement, especially when it comes to the literature that came out of that
So
time period.
you read her in classes?
I did read her book in high school, yes.
Okay. Did anybody else read her? Okay, it's again, and Des hit it on the head when she said that the men kind of put her down and felt that she wasn't good enough. I mean, this is true. I mean, we're talking about ethnicity. We have to talk about gender too. A lot of women who were active in the 60s, with some very notable exceptions, also complained how they had to play a secondary role to the males. And it's interesting that Ellison, who I really like his work, really kind of ignored women in his work too. He was also friends with Langston Hughes. And if anybody's taken Reverend Franklin for a class, is anybody? Teaches Black theology, an alternative to the second half of religion. He worked with Langston Hughes for a number of years, and Richard Wright. Now, the New Masses is important. He was the editor of that for a long time, and I'll get more into this in detail. It was a communist dominated, people were members of the Communist Party. And a lot of African American leaders, as well as others, were members of the party. Paul Robeson, Richard Wright, W.E.B. Du Bois, but most of them quit, including Ellison. And that's another thing. The spark that sent him to the basement in the part you read was he was fearing retribution because he quit the party. Okay. I think, Gabby, you're going to be on in a minute, so get yourself ready.
Okay.
Okay. Gabby?
Yeah.
Okay, in a second, you're going to tell us about the,
Later. Good luck to you.
what? I can't understand you. What? Gabby,
I'm sorry. What were you saying, Professor?
in a minute, you're going to talk about what you wrote about the 1943. Oh, wait, no, that was Karina, right?
I was like, I didn't write about that.
Karina, are you there? Karina,
Yeah.
you're going to talk about the 1943 uprisings in a moment, okay?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Remember how we talked about Baldwin was shaped by the 53 uprisings? But it happened at least once a decade. And so, Karina, tell us about these 1943 Harlem uprisings.
In 1943, what was his name? Oh, there was this black soldier. I forgot his name, but I think it was Robert. And he was in Harlem. He was intervening in the arrest of this woman for like disorderly conduct. He was telling like the cops to release her, but what happened is that the cop shot the black soldier. And so what happened is that rumors started spreading in the neighborhood that a white cop shot a black man. And so these riots started to arise afterwards, like a large crowds and stuff. And so people started looting, like mainly white businesses. They were like breaking windows, they were turning cars over. But in reality, what actually happened is that, well, allegedly, is that the black soldier, he shot the cop, and so the cop, that's why shot him back, and so he was running away. That's why Yeah, so
Yeah.
um
And had you known about this before?
actually no, I never even heard of it.
Had
That
any,
there was a riot.
and it's still somewhat debated who shot who, but the reality is tensions were so high and have consistently been so high. It was like oh, you guys don't know campfires. It was like a tinderbox that any event would spark it and it would go up.
Mhm.
Okay. He wanted to fight. And this is so amazing. It always strikes me as amazing how the groups such as Native Americans or any group really, well, personally in my mind, any group that's oppressive want to fight for a country that oppresses them. But he wasn't allowed in the military except in very, very limited roles because it's separate and equal. And that's Franklin Roosevelt, who many of you wrote about in terms of the New Deal, and we'll get to that, in many ways comes across well, but he was a segregationist. And he refused to integrate the military using separate and equal as his rationale. What president did integrate the military? I'll give you a hint. His wife was named Bess, his daughter Margaret. I met him twice. He's from Missouri, was. He ran a haberdashery shop. How many presidents do we get from Missouri? Josh Halsey and Harry Truman. Josh Halsey, I hope, will never be president. He integrated the military at the same time he dropped 2 bombs on Japan. So it's always mixed. Okay, next. Okay, we got that. Got that. We just did that. Invisible Man was published, is 5 years in the making. He left the United States, as did many. He had left the party while writing The Invisible Man. Todd at Rutgers. Is Ibrahim here yet? Okay, he wrote about the Shadow and Act, which is really an amazing piece. I'm going to go back. Okay, several of you wrote about the Great Depression and the 1930s. And each of you wrote very specific things, which I thought was good. Alex, you talked about the WPA, for example. Alex? Is Alex here? Great way to take attendance. Jalen, you talked about the TWA and the WPA?
Yeah, I don't think so, no.
Yeah, what were they?
Yeah.
Okay, does anybody want to help out on that one? Okay, when you give me the terms, you got to go a little bit deeper than wherever you get them from. WPA was a huge federal program to put people to work. Has anybody taken the Pulaski Skyway? As a WPA project. They did a lot of artwork, built a lot of bridges, and it really put people to work. TWA was a Tennessee Water Authority, built the biggest power plant in the nation. So one of Roosevelt's plans was to get people back to work through government policies. Who's our president now? Who's president now? Is Harris?
Biden.
Oh, Harris hasn't taken over yet? Okay.
No.
Biden's talking about a new WPA project to get people, because unemployment, particularly among low-income people, is so high. Daniel, you there?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you did a really interesting thing, which I thought was nice. You contrasted the 30s to the 20s.
Yeah.
You did two interesting things. You started turning in work and you did that contrast. So tell us about the contrast.
So the contrast between the 20s and the 30s was in the 20s the roaring 20s. So the economy was rapidly increasing, and let's see, hold on. So yeah, the economy was increasing, which ended up doubling the nation's wealth as a whole. That resulted in everyone ranging from like millionaires to janitors investing their life savings into the stock market during the 1920s. And then the market ended up hitting its peak in 1929, but by then the damage was already done because production throughout the nation was already on a decline and the unemployment rate was high.
Yeah. And we just crashed October 29th, 1929. The market, the bottom went out of it. And then you contrasted that to the 30s, which was good. You also talked about another thing of Roosevelt's, which was the FDIC.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. All of you, I bet, have been product of this. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the FDIC is pretty much a federal program that most banks have nowadays to insure your money.
All banks have to have it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. That when you put money in a bank, until this, if the bank went under, you lost all your money. And Roosevelt stopped that from happening. Yeah, and I thought that was good and very specific. Alex is not here. Okay. I'm going to give you a scenario. Somebody has about 40%, 45% of the popular vote, loses the election, gets his followers to storm the Capitol. Who is that?
Trump.
No, is Adolf Hitler in 1933. He lost the election. David Gerlach at 11 tomorrow is going to give a talk about that. But it's very frightening to see the parallels between Trump and Hitler. Trump never won a majority. Hitler never won a majority. Hitler lost the election and had his people storm the Capitol, but his people actually took it over. And that happened in 1933. Okay. Have we heard about Jesse Owens? Does anybody know about him? He won African American, won 4 Olympic track medals in the 36 Olympics. Hitler refused to shake his hand. We treated our African American athletes so poorly that when he came back, he couldn't get a job. So he used to have to race horses at county fairs to make a living. So that was a part of the 30s too. Okay, Zora Neale Houston. It was jazz. On the PowerPoint, you heard the jazz music at the end. That was Louis Armstrong. 1940, Roosevelt had his 3rd term. The only president ever had more than 2 terms. Richard Wright, Proudest Native Son. Has anybody read that? That's a great book too. Duke Ellington started his band. All of this coming out of the Harlem Renaissance, Billie Holiday. Okay, the Tuskegee Airmen were founded, but he refused to put them in there. A major civil rights group that later turned very conservative, but was then progressive, came through. Okay, Ebony magazine was founded. It was called, you probably don't know this. Do anybody know Life magazine? All these magazines closed with the new media, but it was like a weekly magazine, but just focused on white. So there was an alternative black one. Okay, Marissa, you're up. Jackie Robinson. Marissa? Where is she? Marissa. She was here. Does anybody see Marissa? Okay, I want to go back to her because that's very important. Satchel Paige, very famous pitcher, but he was past his prime, but they still let him into the major leagues. He actually came in when he was really old and pitched 3 innings for the Boston Red Sox in 1965, and there were 3 shutout innings. That's how good he was. Truman desegregated the military. Marissa, no Marissa. Okay, has anybody heard of Senator Joe McCarthy? House Un-American Activity Committees. This was extremely important, and again, very parallel to what Trump has done. He was a senator from Wisconsin, very right wing, who kept accusing people of being disloyal and ruining their careers. It was called a blackball. He would bring people to Congress. He would say, I have a list of known communists. Are you now, or have you ever been one? And most of the time, the paper was blank. And for 6 years, he destroyed careers by saying, if you're not loyal to me, you're not loyal to the United States. And finally, it came undone. But Ellison was one of the many people in the Harlem Renaissance who had been a member of the party and who were destroyed. We had the Korean War in 1950s. Eisenhower was elected president. Again, he hated integration. And I'll talk about that. Okay, Brown versus Board of Ed. We're going to study this directly, but it overruled what rule, what law? If it was separate and equal.
Segregation.
Yeah, please know this, the 1896 Plessy v. Ferguson law, and it made that illegal. It said separate is inherently unequal. And it did nothing because it had no enforcement. So in 1955, Brown 2 came along, and that said we had to move with all deliberate speed. That all deliberate speed has left the United States more segregated by education and housing in 2021 than we were in 1954. Okay, but it's the law. Gabby, Disneyland.
Yeah, so I wrote about Disneyland opening,
What?
and it was actually a disaster.
Because he was
So, well, no, because they had decided to open Disneyland a year and a day after construction had first started, and they tried to rush the opening of it. And because of that, it led to a lot of problems, including like water rides were overflowing. There were a lot of like pipelines that weren't working, gas leaks. A lot of the rides weren't even open.
Okay.
And there were also a lot of like riots and stuff that happened because of it.
Yeah, because people went there. Where's it located? The original.
I don't remember. I put the exact place, but I really don't remember.
Anybody know the first Disneyland? Anaheim, California. Okay. Walt Disney and I were born in the same hospital, by the way. I think he did a little bit better with his life. Has anybody not been affected by a Disney product? No, you all have. Now I want to go back for a second because it became such an important part of our culture. And I'm going to talk later on about the exportation of Disney. Now, Marissa, you've decided to rejoin us? Marissa, turn on your mic, Marissa. Marissa, she's there. Okay, we talked about Rosa Parks before 1955, but somebody and I'm still trying to find the virtual tour of the Lorraine Museum. Rosa Parks was not the first, and she wasn't just a tired woman. And we don't read about the first people, but she refused to give up her seat, was arrested, it was planned, and it led to a 13-month boycott. Okay. of the buses. And that was the 57 boycott. I also think I left out something. Yeah, I left out Little Rock, 1956, which was something we've talked about already. Okay, this is all why Ralph Ellison was around. March on Washington, first lunchroom said people like Christopher, his age, but they got out of bed and they went to the lunchroom counter and demanded desegregation, and it started a whole movement. Kennedy was killed, the first big march on Washington, not the first big march, there was a bigger march during World War II. Marian Anderson, has anybody heard of her? The first famous African-American opera singer. She was supposed to sing there and was denied permission by the Parks Commission. So Eleanor Roosevelt, Franklin's wife, who I happened to meet twice, insisted that she give a command performance at the National Art Gallery. Okay, Kennedy was killed in 1963 by Ted Cruz's father. Is that right? Trump said Senator Cruz's father killed him. No. Okay, I'm going to talk about the war on poverty. Several of you wrote about this. And we will start with Karen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, do I just say it? Okay. So Lyndon B. Johnson, who many think actually planned the assassination of Kennedy, who was the vice president, came to office, and he wanted to, his administration's goal was to have a better society, AKA the Great Society. And along with this, he declared a war on poverty because he recognized that around roughly like 20% of Americans were in poverty, and he wanted to fix that. So all part of his like Great Society reform. So he passed laws from Congress, such as the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964, and that created Office of Economy Opportunity, which led to programs like Head Start, Peace Corps, Job Corps, and it all obviously got funded by the government. But unfortunately, there was a lot of issues towards the policy, because people were saying, oh, if you give people, if you do this, then you're gonna make people depend on the government, and they're just gonna continue staying in poverty. And then there were people saying, no, it's a good thing. And then it was a a push and pull type of scenario. And then what made it worse was the Vietnam War, because that's when, you know, they needed money for it. So then, you know, Johnson couldn't like spend more money on the whole the reform. So when the war came, that's when he decided, okay, like I'm not going to run anymore. And so he decided not to run for the next election. And it all basically went downhill.
Okay, good. That was good. Is Jalen there? Jalen,
Yeah.
speak up, please.
Yeah.
You talked also about this, and you mentioned specific programs.
Yeah.
Can you make your mic a little louder?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
Sure.
Okay, that's good enough. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Some of the programs that President Johnson created for the war on poverty situation was I think it was that job opportunity thing. Hold on, let me look it up.
Okay, well, I'll do it, but you gave specifics, which was good. Two of the big ones are Medicaid and Medicare and Head Start. Now, Karen pointed out rightfully that some people, including people like Trump, wanted to get rid of these. Oh, Social Security came out of the Depression too. And they said there were handouts. And some of the people are arguing now against the stimulus plan saying it's a handout. But Johnson was really two people. He was extremely poor and grew up in segregated Texas, was a school teacher, cheated clearly to win his first election to Congress. Had dirt on rose to be the most powerful man in the Senate. He and Kennedy hated each other, but Johnson could get things done. Kennedy actually passed no major legislation. He talked a good game, but didn't get anything done. Johnson, within a year of Kennedy's assassination, got these programs going. He also got the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65. All of these were through Johnson. And, you know, as Karen said, he got undone by the Vietnam War. When he became president, we had 13,000 troops in Vietnam. By 68, we had 500,000. So he's certainly responsible for that. And I think it's Anthony's going to talk about the Gulf of Tonkin in a minute. But so really, had it not been for the Vietnam War, he might have been rated our greatest president ever. But the Vietnam War destroyed his legacy and destroyed actual full implementation of this. He was also one of the few Southerners in the 50s that spoke up for civil rights. But again, in the Vietnam War, he sent more Latinx, more poor whites, and more Black soldiers to die. So very mixed bag. Okay, Anthony, Gulf of Tonkin. You should buy my book on this, by the way, but instead just give us a brief summary.
Well, the Gulf of Tonkin was essentially one of the main reasons that the U.S. was able to publicly declare war on the North Vietnamese.
What's your major? Anthony, what's your major?
I do computer science, cybersecurity.
Oh, for a scientific nerd, you used a brilliant word then. He said publicly, because we've been fighting in Vietnam since 1941.
Yeah, they sent a bunch of troops there, yeah. But yeah, so at that time they were already having essentially like raids. They're U.S. Backed, basically backing the South Vietnamese, attacking the North Vietnamese, and with United States weapons, vehicles, stuff like that. But at this moment, they I think it's August 4th. The two of they called
PT.
there's two of their ships. There's Maddox and Turner Joy reported that they had been ambushed. The North Vietnamese, and soon after that, the president and President Johnson ordered airstrikes against the North Vietnamese boat bases and oil storage depots, which I think was 3 days after that. They passed in Congress I think it was the Gulf of Tonkin. What's it called?
Resolution.
It's a resolution which allowed war against the North Vietnamese, and he had full discretion on what he could do, and it didn't turn out well because I think it was essentially 9 years after that they had to pull all the troops out because the war wasn't really going anywhere.
Yeah, officially in 75, but yeah, that was good. Just because we're almost running out of time. The only problem with the raid on those two ships, where they're a couple, they never happened, was the big one. But Johnson was looking for an excuse to escalate the war because, as I said, he only had 13,000 troops. So even the military reported afterwards that these raids did not happen, even though our PT boats were well within the borders of North Vietnam. So as he said, the Gulf of Tonkin resolution passed 98-2 and gave Johnson basically indiscriminate power to bomb and escalate the war. And we escalated and escalated and escalated. 73, we kind of pulled out most of our troops, and South Vietnam fell in 75. By the way, in 64, his Secretary of Defense, Robert McNamara, wrote a white paper, meaning a paper for eyes only, saying there's no way we could win this war. And they knew that the whole time. Fun fact, the pilot that flew over the ships when the attack was going on and reported that these attacks never happened, who was later shot down and was a prisoner for 7 years in North Vietnam's son, was a major drug pusher where I went to college, but then grew up to be a high school principal in New York City, Stockdale. Marissa, are you there now? Okay, we'll pick up on the rest of this tomorrow and then really go deeply into the prologue. Thank you all, though, for writing those. I think it's a good way to get to this information. Please, in the future, get them done on time, but it was a nice job. I will see you all tomorrow.
Peace.
Have a good day.
You too.
Have a good one, Professor.